Welcome to my World History Notes, where I read from the book I wrote to teach world history to homeschoolers. The Bible Believer Looks at World History. You can find it on lulu.com, amazon.com, or the Bible Baptist Bookstore. I'm going to finish up here with my conclusions on Rome and Judea. We're going to jump ahead to John Foxe in his famous Foxe's Book of Martyrs describes Nero's persecution as such. I talked about this yesterday, too, from an earlier historian. The first persecution of the church took place in the year 67 under Nero, the sixth emperor of Rome. This monarch reigned for the space, this is a quote from John Foxe's Book of Martyrs. This monarch reigned for the space of 5 years with tolerable credit to himself, but then gave way to the greatest extravagancy of temper and to the most atrocious barbarities. Among other diabolical whims, he ordered that the city of Rome should be set on fire, which order was executed by his officers, guards, and servants. While the imperial city was in flames, he went up to the tower of Maecenas, played upon his harp, sung the song of the burning of Troy, and openly declared that, quote, he wished the ruin of all things before his death. Besides the noble pile called the circus, many other palaces and houses were consumed. Several thousands perished in the flames, were smothered in the smoke, or buried beneath the ruins. This dreadful conflagration continued 9 days, when Nero, finding that his conduct was greatly blamed, and a severe odium cast upon him, determined to lay the whole upon Christians at once to excuse himself and have an opportunity of glutting his sight with new cruelties. This was the occasion of the first persecution, and the barbarities exercised on the Christians were such as even excited the commiseration of the Romans themselves. Nero even refined upon cruelty and contrived all manner of punishments for the Christians that the most infernal imagination could design. In particular, he had some sewed up in the skins of wild beasts and then worried by dogs until they expired, and others dressed in shirts made stiff with wax, fixed to axle trees and set on fire in his gardens in order to illuminate them. This persecution was general throughout the whole Roman Empire, but it rather increased than diminished the spirit of Christianity. In the course of it, St. Paul and St. Peter were martyred. To their names may be added Erastus, the Chamberlain of Corinth, Aristarchus, the Macedonian, and Trophimus, an Ephesian, converted by St. Paul and fellow laborer with him, Joseph, commonly called Barsabbas, and Ananias, bishop of Damascus, each of the 70, unquote. Okay, so back to what I'm saying. In spite of the fact that the Roman politicians would lament on how Christian congregations not only took care of their own poor, but the pagan poor around them as well, in spite of the statements about how exemplary and virtuous Christian women were thought to be, and in spite of the Christian habit of hanging around garbage dumps to save and raise discarded Roman children unwanted by their parents, the second great persecution occurred around 81 AD and was performed by the Emperor Domitian. Christians were accused of everything from cannibalism and from a misunderstanding of the Lord's Supper to hatred of humanity by the doctrine that people are not born good but bad and must be saved. Of course, there was also the refusal to worship the emperor, which was the chief source of resentment toward them by the civil authority. The second great persecution of the Christians was under Domitian in or about 81 AD and is described by Foxe in this way. The Emperor Domitian, who was naturally inclined to cruelty, first slew his brother and then raised a second persecution against the Christians. In his rage, he put to death some of the Roman senators, some through malice, and others to confiscate their estates. He then commanded all the lineage of David be put to death. Among the numerous martyrs that suffered during this persecution was Simeon, bishop of Jerusalem, who was crucified, and St. John, who was boiled in oil and afterward banished to Patmos. Flavia, the daughter of a Roman senator, was likewise banished to Pontus, and a law was made, quote, that no Christian once brought before the tribunal should be exempted from punishment without renouncing his religion. A variety of fabricated tales were, during this reign, composed in order to injure the Christians. Such was the infatuation of the pagans that if famine, pestilence, or earthquakes afflicted any of the Roman provinces, it was laid upon the Christians. These persecutions among the Christians increased the number of informers, and many, for the sake of gain, swore away the lives of the innocent. Another hardship was that when any Christians were brought before the magistrates, a test oath was proposed. If they refused to take it, death was pronounced against them, and if they confessed themselves Christians, the sentence was the same. The following were the most remarkable among the numerous martyrs who suffered during this persecution. Dionysius the Areopagite was an Athenian by birth and educated in all the useful ornamental literature of Greece. He then traveled to Egypt to study astronomy and made very particular observations on the great supernatural eclipse, which happened at the time of our Savior's crucifixion. The sanctity of his conversation and purity of his manners recommended him so strongly to the Christians in general that he was appointed Bishop of Athens. Nicodemus, a benevolent Christian of some distinction, suffered at Rome during the rage of Domitian's persecution. Protasius and Gravasius were martyred at Milan. Timothy was a celebrated disciple of Paul and Bishop of Ephesus, where he zealously governed the church until AD 97. At this period, as the pagans were about to celebrate a feast called Catagogion, Timothy, meeting the procession, severely reproved them for their ridiculous idolatry, which so exasperated the people they fell upon him with their clubs and beat him in so dreadful a manner that he expired of the bruises 2 days later. Now that's from Fox's Book of Martyrs. It is inherited from Catholic tradition and in Christian tradition. It's not necessarily authoritative in the sense of, this is the end result of that, but this is just a historical representation in Fox's Book of Martyrs of a couple of persecutions, just to give you an idea of what happened, although there are more Christians being executed today in the world than ever during a week in the Roman Empire. So when you compare, such things, just keep that in mind. But we're going to return to the development of Christianity later. But the next chapter, the next thing I'm going to talk about, start out what life was like in the Roman Empire of the first century. So if you'll, we're going to discuss coming up, we have first century Rome, we have China, Africa, Europe, and the Americas. There's a lot of information, a lot of ground to cover. Thank you.